I want you to understand something before I say another word. I am not a good man. I think I used to believe I was. I think I carried that around for most of my life, like it was something I'd earned, something stitched into me at birth that couldn't come undone. A decent man, a quiet man, a man who went to work and came home and didn't raise his voice and paid what he owed and looked people in the eye. I believed that about myself for a long time, right up until the moment I didn't have to believe it anymore because I had the proof, and the proof was what I did, and what I did was not the act of a good man. It was the act of something colder than I knew I had in me. I found the phone on a Tuesday. That detail never leaves me. Not a Friday night, not some dramatic evening with a glass of wine on the counter and soft music playing somewhere. A Tuesday. She'd left it on the kitchen counter when she went upstairs to shower, and I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I was not a suspicious man. I was not a man who checked phones or followed wives or hired anybody or drove past anywhere. I was 61 years old, and I had been married to Denise for 22 years, and it never once crossed my mind that she was anything other than what she told me she was. The phone lit up. I wasn't even looking at it directly. I was standing at the sink, rinsing out my coffee mug, and the phone was just there, on the counter, and it lit up, and I glanced over the way you glance at anything that moves in your peripheral vision. Just a reflex, nothing intentional, and I saw the name. Marcus. Just that. Marcus. And something in my chest did a thing I can't fully explain. Not a drop, not a lurch. Something more like a stillness, like the body already knew something the mind was still negotiating. I stood there, with water running over my hands, and I looked at that name, and I thought nothing for about 4 or 5 seconds. Just nothing, like the thoughts had all stepped back to make room for whatever was about to come through the door. I turned off the tap. I dried my hands. I picked up the phone. Now understand, it wasn't locked. She never locked her phone around me. That's what I keep coming back to. She was comfortable enough to leave it unlocked, which either means she trusted me not to look, or she was careless, or she had decided somewhere in herself that it didn't matter anymore whether I found out or not. I've turned those 3 possibilities over for years, and I still don't know which one is true, and maybe none of them are. Maybe it was just an ordinary Tuesday mistake. But I pick up her phone, and I open the messages, and there is Marcus Tate's name at the top of the list, because his was the most recent message. And I scroll up, and I read. I don't need to tell you everything I read. I need to tell you that I read enough. I need to tell you that what I read was not ambiguous, was not something a reasonable man could have explained away, was not a friendship that had drifted too close to a line. It was explicit in a way that told me this had been going on for some time. There were references to places I knew. There was a date mentioned that I recognized because on that date I had been in Memphis for 3 days for my cousin Raymond's funeral, and she had told me she was home, and she was sad, and she missed me, and she was cooking just for herself, and it felt lonely in the house. I read that date, and I set the phone back down on the counter exactly as I'd found it. I went and sat in the living room. I sat in my chair, the one by the window, the one I've sat in for 20 years, and I looked out at the street, and the street was the same. Cars parked, a dog being walked by the woman 3 houses down, the oak tree by the curb with its roots pushing up through the concrete the way it always had. Everything, exactly as it had been 20 minutes ago, when I was just a man, rinsing a coffee mug, she came downstairs 40 minutes later. She was wearing her blue robe, her hair wrapped. She smiled at me when she came into the living room and said something about dinner, asked what I felt like eating. I said I wasn't hungry. She looked at me for a second. I looked back at her, and something passed between us in that moment that I don't have a word for, because it wasn't quite recognition on her part. It wasn't guilt surfacing. It was something more like a flicker of concern, a small question in her eyes. "Are you all right?" And I said yes. I was just tired. She went to the kitchen. I sat in my chair, and I made a decision. Not an emotional decision. Not a decision made in the heat of discovery or the blur of shock. I made the decision the way I used to make decisions at work when I was a project manager and something had gone wrong, and there were multiple ways to respond to the problem, and I would sit very quietly and think through each option all the way to the end and choose the one that accomplished what I actually wanted to accomplish. I decided I was not going to say a word to her. Not that night, not the next day, not until I was ready. And what I was going to do in the meantime, what I was going to do in the weeks and months between that Tuesday and whatever end I was building toward, that is the part of this story that I have never said out loud to another living person. I'm saying it now because I'm old and I'm tired, and because carrying a thing like this is heavy in a way that doesn't get lighter with time. It only redistributes. You shift it from one shoulder to the other. You get used to the weight until you forget you're carrying it. And then something small happens. A song, a smell, a name in a conversation. And there it is again, pressing down. And you remember what you are. Marcus Tate. I knew Marcus Tate, not well, but I knew him. He was Denise's first husband. They had been married for 6 years before I came into her life, divorced for 3 years by the time we met, and she had always spoken about him with a particular flatness, a careful neutrality that I interpreted as indifference. He had moved to Atlanta. He had remarried. He had a daughter. These were the facts she gave me about him, and I filed them away the way you file information about someone who is part of a person's history, but not part of their present. Except he was part of her present. Had been, I would come to understand, for at least 2 years. What I did after that Tuesday, and I need you to sit with this, I need you to not rush past it the way I want to rush past it even now. What I did was I waited. I watched. I went about my life. I made her dinner on the nights I cooked. I sat across from her at the table and I talked about ordinary things. The neighbors, my sister's knee surgery, the yard. I slept next to her in our bed. I didn't touch her, but I had been a man who didn't reach for her often in those last years anyway, so she didn't seem to mark the difference. I was good at ordinary. I had always been good at ordinary. And while I was being ordinary, I was doing other things. The first thing I did was I found Marcus Tate's wife. Her name was Angela. Angela Tate, née Washington. She was a school teacher, taught 4th grade at an elementary school in Decatur, Georgia. She had a Facebook page that was not private. She posted about her students and her garden and her daughter, who was 8 years old and whose name was Chloe. She posted about her church. She posted pictures of herself and Marcus at dinners and family gatherings, and one from their anniversary the previous year. The two of them at a restaurant, him with his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling. I looked at that photo for a long time. I looked at his face. He was 63, heavy around the jaw, grey at his temples, Nice-looking man, I suppose. The kind of man who photographs well at anniversary dinners. I thought about what he was. I thought about what I was going to do, about what he was. And then I thought about Angela. Angela with her fourth graders, and her garden, and her church, and her daughter named Chloe. Angela who probably looked at that same anniversary photo and felt something warm and uncomplicated. I made a second decision. I want to tell you that I felt something about that second decision. I want to tell you that there was some part of me that argued against it. Some older, softer part of me that said this is not right. This woman has nothing to do with your wound. Leave her alone. Take your grief and your rage and your humiliation and direct it somewhere that makes sense. I want to tell you, there was a long internal debate. There wasn't. I wrote Angela Tate a letter, not an email. A letter, handwritten on plain white paper with no return address. I drove to a post office 20 minutes from my neighborhood to mail it. I wore gloves when I sealed the envelope because I had read somewhere that DNA can be extracted from the saliva used to seal an envelope, and I was not a man who did things carelessly. The letter said what it needed to say. It was not cruel in its language. I want to be precise about that because I have turned this over many times, and I will not comfort myself with a cruelty I don't deserve. The letter was not vicious. It was not graphic. It said that her husband had been involved in an ongoing relationship with a woman in my city, that this involvement was not casual, that it had been occurring for at least 2 years, and that the woman in question was his former wife. I told her that I was the husband of the woman involved. I told her that I was not writing out of malice toward her, but that she deserved to know the truth. That last sentence was a lie. I was writing entirely out of malice, not toward Angela. But malice is not a precise instrument. It does not discriminate. You aim it at one thing, and it spreads. I sent the letter. And then I waited again. 3 weeks passed. Denise said nothing. She was the same as she had always been, or almost the same. I had become, in those weeks, an expert in the texture of her ordinary behavior, the way she carried herself through the house, the rhythms of her phone use, the times she stepped outside to take a call. And I noticed nothing different. Then one evening she came home from work, and she looked tired in a different way. Not physically tired, tired in the face, behind the eyes. Tired in the way that people look when they've been managing something draining for several days. She sat down at the dinner table and she said Marcus had called her. She said this casually, in the middle of talking about something else, as if inserting it between other sentences would reduce its weight. She said his wife had received some kind of strange letter. She said Marcus was upset. She used the word strange about 4 times. Strange letter, strange situation, some strange person. And I watched her describe it all with that particular careful voice she used when she was deciding in real time how much to tell me. I said, that's strange. She said, yeah. And that was the end of it. She ate her dinner. I watched her eat her dinner, and I thought about Angela Tate reading that letter, and I felt nothing that I can name as good. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel righteous. What I felt was something closer to the feeling you get when you've pressed on a bruise. A specific, deliberate pain. Chosen. Yours. I stayed for 2 more months. 2 more months of ordinary evenings. 2 more months of sleeping on my side of the bed. 2 more months of coffee and dinners and the news on television and her voice in the kitchen and the small sounds of a life I was already dismantling in my head while I sat in the middle of it. In those 2 months, I did 2 more things. The first thing was quieter. I contacted a lawyer, not our usual lawyer, a man I'd never used before, a man from a firm 2 counties over, and I began the process of separating what was mine from what was ours. We owned property. We had accounts. We had 22 years of financial life woven together, the way long marriages weave things together, thoroughly and invisibly, so that you can't pull one thread without moving 20 others. I spent those 2 months pulling threads very carefully, very quietly, so that when I was ready to leave, I would not leave anything behind that I had built. The second thing I did was worse. Marcus Tate had a brother, Jerome. Jerome worked in insurance, was well regarded in his field, had built his professional reputation over 30 years. Marcus and Jerome were close. I had gathered this from various corners of the internet, from photos, from a mention in an old newspaper article about their father's passing, from the way Marcus spoke about him in an interview I found from a trade association he belonged to. I sent information about Marcus to Jerome's employer. I want to stop here and make sure I am telling this accurately. What I sent was not fabricated. Everything I sent was real. Marcus had, years earlier, been involved in a financial dispute, not a criminal matter, but a civil one, a judgment against him for a business debt that had been satisfied eventually, but that left a record. I found that record. I packaged it with other publicly available information, and I sent it to Jerome's company with a carefully worded letter suggesting that Marcus, who occasionally did contract work through his brother's firm, might be a liability they hadn't properly vetted. Was any of it false? No. Was the intent to harm? Yes. Did it accomplish what I intended? I believe so. I don't know for certain. I never followed up. I told myself I didn't want to know. What I mean is, I didn't want to know the details. I was fairly certain something had shifted, because 3 weeks after I sent that letter, I found Denise in the kitchen crying quietly. And when I asked her what was wrong, she said, "Nothing, just a hard week." And something in the way she said it told me Marcus was no longer something she could reach for. The last thing I did was the simplest. I left. I walked out of that house on a Thursday morning in March with 2 suitcases and my documents and the few things I'd been quietly moving to my brother Earl's garage over the preceding weeks. I left her a letter, a real one, nothing like the one I'd sent Angela, that said only that I knew, that I had known for a long time, and that I was done. I did not call her. I did not speak to her for almost a year. When she reached out, eventually, through my sister, asking if we could talk, I said no. Not because I was still angry, not even because I hadn't forgiven her, though I hadn't. I said no because I had already been somewhere she couldn't follow me, somewhere I'd gone alone in those 2 months of quiet and ordinary evenings, and I didn't know how to come back from it or whether coming back was something I wanted to do. That was 11 years ago. I'm sitting here now in this chair, in this room, and it's past midnight, and the street outside is quiet, and I've been thinking about all of this for longer than I want to admit, turning it over the way you turn over a stone at the bottom of a river, slow and deliberate, watching what lives underneath scatter. I think about Angela Tate sometimes, more than I think about Denise, honestly. I wonder if she stayed with Marcus. I wonder if that letter changed something in their house, the way finding that phone changed something in mine. Whether she went through her own months of ordinary evenings sitting across from a man she now looked at differently, carrying something she hadn't asked to carry. I did that. I sent that into her life without her consent and without her knowledge, and I told myself it was because she deserved to know, which was a lie I've already admitted. But underneath that lie was something I've been slower to admit, which is that I wanted her to feel some version of what I was feeling, and I didn't care that she had done nothing to earn that. She was an innocent woman. I made her into a piece of something. That's the thought that sits with me the longest. Not what Marcus deserved, not what Denise chose. Those things I can reason around. I can place them in a story that has a shape, that has a sequence of causes and effects I can follow. What I cannot reason around is Angela. What I cannot follow to a clean ending is what I used her for. I was 61 years old, and I thought I knew what I was. I think about my father. He was a man who said very little and endured a great deal, and never once, in my memory, did anything he couldn't stand behind in the daylight. He worked the same job for 31 years. He was home for dinner. He didn't drink past a glass or two. He told me once, I was maybe 17. We were in the garage. He was working on the car the way he always was, and I was handing him tools. He told me that a man's character is not what he does when things go right. Any fool can be decent when things are easy. He said the measure of a man is what he reaches for when things go wrong. I reached for a piece of paper and a pen and a plan. I don't think that's what he meant. My father died in 1998. A stroke, quick, on a Sunday afternoon in his own kitchen. I was 34. I had been married to Denise for 3 years. He met her twice, maybe 3 times. And he liked her. He said she had good sense and a good laugh, and that those were the 2 things that mattered most in a long marriage. I remember him saying that. I remember thinking he was probably right. I think about what he would have said if he had known what I did. I think he would have been quiet for a long time, and then he would have said something plain, and it would have landed heavier than an argument. That was his way. He didn't lecture. He said one thing, once, and let it sit there. I wonder sometimes if the thing I miss most about him is that he would have told me the truth about myself without anger, and there is nobody left in my life who can do that. My brother Earl tries, but Earl has always loved me more than he has been honest with me, and that's a beautiful thing. But it's not the same. My children, I have 2 sons and a daughter. My children know some version of what happened with their mother. They know we divorced. They know why, broadly, because Denise told them more than I would have told them, and I have never blamed her for that. What they don't know is what I did about it. I wonder about that. I wonder if they would look at me differently. I wonder if I want them to. My oldest son, Darnell, he is 35 now, has 2 kids of his own, lives outside of Charlotte. Darnell has always had a particular respect for me that I have carried carefully because I knew it was built on an incomplete picture. He calls me every Sunday. He asks my opinion about his children and his work and the decisions he's making. He talks to me the way I imagine I would have talked to my father if my father had been easier to approach, if the distance between us had been smaller. And every Sunday when I hear him on the phone, respectful and present and trusting, I think about what he'd think if he saw the whole picture. I don't tell him. I have not told any of my children. There are things you protect people from, and things you keep from people to protect yourself. and it is not always easy to know which one you're doing, and sometimes you are doing both at the same time. Denise and I, we were not a perfect marriage. I should say that. I should say it now, because the thing I have always been most honest with myself about is that I was not the easiest man to be married to. I was present, but I was not always warm. I provided, but I was not always generous. There were years, particularly the years when work was hard, when I was managing more than I could manage and bringing the weight of it home in my silence. There were years when I gave her the shape of a husband without the substance of one. I was there, but I was not reachable. I came home, and I sat in my chair, and I was not mean, was never mean, but I was somewhere inside myself in a way that left her alone in the house even when I was in it. I know this. I have known this for a long time. I am not excusing what she did, but I am not pretending I was a full partner to her in every season of our marriage, because that would be dishonest. And if there is anything I want this to be, it is honest. Honest in a way I was not honest in that house after I found the phone, in those 2 months of ordinary evenings, sitting across from her and saying nothing and doing what I was doing in the quiet. She cheated on me. She went back to Marcus Tate for at least 2 years, and she looked at me every day, and she was warm and ordinary, and she handed me coffee in the morning and asked about my week, and she was lying every single time, lying by presence, lying by the daily texture of a marriage that was 2 different things to the 2 people inside it. That is a particular kind of lie. It is comprehensive. It fills every corner. And what I did in response was cold in a different way. Hers was hot, I think. Even if she was cool about it on the surface, what she was doing had fire in it, had want in it, had a person being pulled towards something she still wanted after 20-some years of not having it. Mine was cold all the way down. No fire, no want. Just a plan, executed over 2 months, designed to cause maximum damage with minimum noise. There's something about that coldness that I think is actually worse than what she did. Worse in a different way. She betrayed our marriage. I did something more calculated than that. I decided deliberately and without passion to hurt people, one of whom had hurt me, and one of whom had not. I think about that often, the absence of passion in what I did. When I was angry, and I was angry, somewhere underneath all that stillness, I was burning in a way I had no name for at the time. When I was angry, I didn't express it. I converted it. I turned it into planning, the way you turn heat into something useful. And I think that conversion, that translation from feeling into strategy, was the most revealing thing about me. More revealing than the cheating was about Denise. More revealing than any of it. Because Denise, I think, was weak in the way that humans are weak. Lonely in a marriage that had gone quiet, drawn back to something familiar. I do not think she was a bad woman. I think she made choices that were wrong, and she made them for reasons that were human. That's not forgiveness. That's just accuracy. What I showed myself I was in those 2 months, I am still working out a word for. I have been working out a word for 11 years. I see her sometimes. Not often. We live in the same city. I have thought about moving, have never moved. And this city is not so large that people don't pass through the same spaces. I saw her at my grandson's birthday 2 years ago. Darnell invited us both, and we were both too proud to make our presence contingent on the other's absence, So we were both there, and I watched her hold my grandson, and I watched her laugh at something my daughter-in-law said, and I thought about all of it. She looked the same. Older, the way we're all older, but the same. Same laugh, same way of holding a child, that particular ease she always had, that warmth she had with children that she never quite had with me, not in the last years, not once the marriage had settled into what it settled into. She looked at me once across that room and nodded. I nodded back. That was the whole of it. We have not spoken since I left. I do not know if she knows what I did. She knows I knew. She has known that since the letter I left. But whether she ever connected me to what happened with Marcus and Angela and Jerome's firm, I don't know. Maybe she did. Maybe she sat with it the way I sat with everything, quietly, and decided not to pull the thread. Or maybe it never occurred to her. I was an ordinary man. I had always been an ordinary man. It may not have crossed her mind that an ordinary man was capable of what I was capable of. That's something that stays with me too. The way I was underestimated. The way I may have even underestimated myself. Not with pride, not with any satisfaction, but with the slow, unsettling recognition that I didn't fully know what I was until the circumstances that would reveal it arrived. You can live 61 years and not know what you'd reach for. That's the thing about character. The ordinary tests don't test it. The small provocations, the minor disappointments, the manageable losses, those don't show you anything you couldn't have guessed. It's the unmanageable thing, the thing you weren't prepared for, the thing that hits you at the kitchen sink on a Tuesday evening with water running over your hands. That's the thing that shows you. And what I saw was not what I'd expected. My mother used to say that still water can hide a depth you don't expect. She meant it as a warning about other people. She used to say, "Watch out for the quiet ones, they're thinking more than you know." She meant Marcus, men like Marcus, men who smile at you and keep their own counsel, and you never know what's moving beneath. She never meant it about me. I think about her saying that, and I think about standing in that kitchen, making my plan, and I understand now that she was also describing her own son, and she never knew it. And she died in 2011 not knowing it, and there is something lonely in that. She would have been horrified, not in a loud way. My mother's horror was quiet, like my father's. She would have looked at me and gone very still, and then she would have said, "Boy, what did you do?" Not as a question, as a recognition. I would not have had an answer worth giving her. I have a lot of time now. I retired 6 years ago. My days have a shape, but not a weight. There is a difference between those two things that you only understand once you've had both and then lost one. I wake up at the same time I always have. I make coffee. I read. I walk in the mornings, if the weather cooperates. I see my children when they'll have me, and I hold my grandchildren, and I watch things grow in the yard. Ordinary life. A good life, people would say. A man who has come through things and landed in a quiet place. And I sit in this chair at night, in this room, and the quiet is full of things that don't go away just because you've built a quiet life around them. I never called Angela. I thought about calling Angela many times over the years. Not to apologize. I'm not certain I have a right to call a stranger and ask them to receive an apology from me and process it on my behalf. That's a particular kind of selfishness dressed up as conscience. I thought about writing to her again, explaining. But what would the explanation be? I was in pain, and I used you as a vessel for it. That's true, but it's not something that does her any good to receive. So I didn't. I just kept thinking about her. The way you carry a debt you have no way to pay. You don't stop owing it. You just carry it. Darnell called last Sunday. He asked me how I was sleeping. I said fine. He said I sounded tired. I said it was late when he called, which was true enough. We talked about his youngest, who has just started walking. This little girl who moves through a room with that particular concentrated determination that toddlers have, as if walking is still something they have to decide to do with their whole self. I told him I remembered when he was that age. He laughed and asked what I remembered. I said I remembered being terrified of how small he was, how I was afraid to hold him wrong, how his mother would hand him to me, and I would sit very still, holding him with both arms, not moving, as if movement itself was dangerous. He said, "Were you scared a lot back then?" I said, "More than I let on." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I think that's probably true of most fathers." I said, "Probably." After we hung up, I sat for a while with the phone in my hand, thinking about Darnell as a baby, thinking about how young I was then, how certain I was about the shape of my life, how I thought I knew what I was building and what it would add up to. 40 years ago. 40 years and a different man in some ways, and the same man in the ways that matter most. My daughter is 30 now. Her name is Imani. She is the one who looks the most like her mother, and she is the one I find hardest to be around because of it. And I hate that about myself. I hate that she carries her mother's face into a room, and something in me shifts slightly, involuntarily, the way an old wound shifts when the weather changes. She doesn't know. She has no reason to know. She just knows her father is sometimes slightly unreachable, slightly elsewhere, and she has interpreted this generously as just the way he is. That is also the way I am. But it is also something specific to her face, to the angle of her eyes, to the particular way she smiles when she's uncertain, which is exactly her mother's smile, and I have never told her that, and I never will. I wonder sometimes if Denise ever told any of our children about Marcus, about the full truth of it, not just the version where their parents divorced, but the version with the details. I don't think she did. I think she is a woman who protects her children from things the way I protect them, which is to say she protects them from the things that would cost her, and she is human enough that those two categories overlap substantially. We are not so different, Denise and I. That is perhaps the hardest thing to carry. I spent years building a distance between what she was and what I was, organizing the story so that she was the transgressor and I was the man wronged, and the man wronged is a sympathetic figure, a clean figure, a man you feel for. And I was wronged. I am not walking back the wrong that was done to me, but I am also a man who received that wrong and responded to it in a way that crossed a line that was my own to cross, not hers, not Marcus's, a line that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with what I was willing to do, what I was capable of quietly deciding to do over coffee and dinner and ordinary evenings in a house where I already knew the truth. There are decisions you make quickly and regret slowly, and there are decisions you make slowly, carefully, methodically, over weeks that you then spend the rest of your life trying to outrun. I made the second kind. I have not outrun it. My second son, Terence, is the most like me. Quiet, careful, tends to hold things inside until they've been there long enough to become part of the wall. He and his wife went through a hard year a few years back. I won't say what it was about, because it's not mine to say. But he called me during that time, called me more than he normally does, which for Terence means something. And I could hear in his voice what I remembered from my own years of being in that state, that particular frequency of managed tension, where you are performing fine for everyone while something is happening underneath. I told him to talk to her. I told him, whatever it is, say it directly. Don't let it sit. Don't let it calcify. He said, what if saying it makes it real? I said, it's already real. You already know what it is. The only question is whether she gets to know it too. He was quiet. I said, Terence, be direct with her. Be honest with her, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I meant it. I meant every word of it. And I was also aware, sitting in this chair, that I had said almost none of those things to Denise, that the advice I was giving my son was the precise opposite of what I had done. I had not been direct. I had not been honest. I had found out the most significant thing there was to find out in my marriage, and I had said nothing and done everything. I don't know what it means to give better counsel than you live. Maybe it means you learn something the hard way and you're trying to save them the tuition. Or maybe it means you're still the same man who sat in that chair in 2013 making his plan, just older and more articulate about it. I think about Marcus sometimes, not with the old heat, that's gone, has been gone for years, but with a kind of detached curiosity. He is 74 now, if he is alive, which I have no reason to believe he is not. I wonder if he and Angela survived what I sent them. I wonder if they're still in that house in Decatur with Chloe, who would be 19 by now, almost 20, not a girl in photos anymore, but a young woman somewhere starting her own life. I wonder if Marcus ever told Angela the whole truth. I wonder if she found it out gradually or all at once, and which is worse. I am not sorry Marcus Tate's life was disrupted. I want to be honest about that. I have made my peace with a lot of things over 11 years, but I have not made my peace with Marcus to the degree where I can generate genuine sorrow for his disrupted peace. What he did was deliberate. What he did went on for 2 years. What he did was done with full knowledge of what he was doing and full regard for his own want and no regard for anything else. I do not weep for Marcus Tate, but Angela I think about with something that is closer to grief than anything else, a small, specific, lasting grief. For a woman I never met, who was living her life in a house in Georgia, who taught children and tended her garden and went to church and loved her husband badly or well, I don't know which, and received a letter from a stranger that changed something in the structure of her life. I don't know what it changed. I don't know if she stayed or left, if Chloe grew up in one house or two, if that garden still gets tended, or if it went to seed after some other Tuesday that everything turned on. I don't know. I will never know. That not knowing is part of it, part of what I carry, because what I did cleanly, with no way to measure the damage afterward, and I think I chose that too. I think I structured it so that I would not have to witness the consequence, and that cowardice, calling it by its name, cowardice, that cowardice is maybe the thing I am least able to make peace with, to do harm and then to look away. That's not the worst thing a person can do. I know that. I know that in the full catalogue of what people do to each other, what I did is small. I sent letters. I made a phone call. No one was physically hurt. No one was destroyed in any final sense. These are real things. true things, and I know them. But small harm is still harm. And chosen harm, harm that you plan and execute coolly over 2 months, is a particular kind. It has a quality that accidental harm doesn't have, that impulsive harm doesn't have. It has the quality of having been fully yours. Nobody made me do it. Nothing overtook me. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't out of my mind with grief, though maybe I should have been. I was just a man at a table, making decisions. That is fully mine. I own that fully. I wonder sometimes if that's what this is, what this sitting here in the late night is, some kind of attempt to own it out loud, even if only to the room, even if only to whatever silence is listening, to say it plainly, without dressing it up in the story of my wound, without leading always with what was done to me so that what I did looks small by comparison, to say, I found out my wife had been unfaithful to me, and instead of grief, I went to calculation, and instead of confrontation, went to planning, and I hurt people, and one of them didn't deserve it. I was not a good man in those months. I do not know if I am a good man now. I think I am a better man than I was then, which is not the same thing. I think I am a man who has spent 11 years turning over what he did, and the turning over has made him gentler in certain ways, and more careful with certain kinds of silence, and more honest with himself about what lives in him. But turning something over doesn't undo it. It just means you've looked at it from every angle. It means you know its shape. I know the shape of what I did. My grandson, Darnell's oldest, he is 7. His name is Marcus, which is a coincidence so cruel and ordinary that I have decided it simply means nothing. And I have been mostly successful at that. My grandson Marcus asked me last summer what I was thinking about, because I had gone quiet at the table, which he had noticed the way children notice things when they are paying attention. I said I was thinking about the yard. He said, what about the yard? I said about what I need to plant in the fall. He thought about this for a moment, and then he said, can I help? I said yes, and we talked about what to plant, and where, and why certain things grow better in certain kinds of soil. And he listened with his whole face, the way children listen when they are genuinely interested. And I felt, for that half hour, completely in the present. Not in 2013, not in Decatur, Georgia, not in my kitchen on a Tuesday, just there, at the table, with this boy who had his grandmother's eyes, Denise's eyes, and whose name was a coincidence that meant nothing. Those moments are something. They are not redemption. I don't think there is a version of the word redemption that applies cleanly to what I did and what I am. But they are something. They are the other thing that exists alongside the weight, not cancelling it out, just existing alongside it, which is, I think, the best you can hope for after a certain age. I'm 72 now. My body is beginning to tell me things I'd rather not hear. The usual things, the ordinary inventory of age, my knees, my sleep. The way light seems different now than it did at 60, dimmer somehow, not outside, but inside. The way the world is processed. My doctor tells me what doctors tell men my age, and I listen, and I do most of what he says, and I sit in this chair at night, and I'm aware that the number of nights I have left is different than it was at 61, is different than it was even 5 years ago. And that awareness is not fearful, exactly. But it is there. It is present in the room, the way another person might be present, quiet, patient, not demanding anything yet. I think about Denise sometimes, and I hope she is well. I mean that plainly. I hope she is well. I hope she is warm somewhere and has people she loves around her. And I hope the years since we parted have given her things she needed that I didn't give her, and that the things I did in those 2 months never reached her in a way she could trace back to me, not because I want to be safe from her knowledge of it, but because I think it would hurt her in a way that serves no one. She deserved better from me. In the marriage, I mean. In those years when I was present without being present, when I sat in my chair and was elsewhere, when the house was quiet in a way that was mine to fill, and I chose not to fill it. She deserved more of me than she got in those years, and I think the woman she became in those years, the one who reached back toward Marcus, the one who needed something warm and particular, I think that woman was, in part, made by the man I was failing to be. I hold that. I hold that alongside everything else. I do not use it to excuse what she did. I do not use it to excuse what I did. I use it to keep myself honest, to make sure that when I sit here at night and turn this over, I am turning over the whole thing, not just the part where I was wronged, not just the part that makes me a clean figure standing at a sink on a Tuesday with the world happening to him. The world didn't just happen to me. I happened too. That's the thing about a long marriage, about any long life, really. You are never only acted upon. You act and you act, and your actions make the ground of things, and eventually the ground is what it is because of what you made it and what someone else made it together. And when something breaks, it doesn't break from one side only. That doesn't mean she didn't betray me. She did. That doesn't mean I wasn't in the right to leave. I was. But it means that the story I told myself for the first few years after, the story where I was the wronged man, clean and justified, and she was the transgressor, and what I did was simply what a man does when pushed past his limit. That story was always incomplete, and I knew it was incomplete, and I told it anyway, because incomplete stories are easier to sleep inside. I have stopped sleeping inside it. This is what happens after midnight in a quiet room. You can't maintain the useful versions. The darkness takes the easy angles away, and you're left with the shape of the actual thing, which is always more complicated than the version you keep for daylight. The version for daylight is, I had a marriage. My wife was unfaithful. I found out. I left. The version for 2 a.m. is everything else. I don't know what I believe about what comes after this. After the body quits. After the chair is empty and the room is dark for the last time. I was raised in church. My mother was faithful in the way that certain women of her generation were faithful, deeply and without performance, and I carry something from that, even though I have not been a regular church-going man for most of my adult life. Some residue, some sense that there is something beyond what is visible, though I couldn't tell you its shape or its name or what it requires. But if there is something, if there is some moment of accounting, I wonder what I'd say about those 2 months. I wonder if I would try to explain it the way I've been trying to explain it here. All the context, all the wound, all the calculation of what Denise had done and what Marcus had done and what I was feeling under all that stillness. Or if, in that kind of clarity, the explanation would fall away and there'd just be the act itself. What I chose to do, freely, with full use of myself. The letter to Angela. The information about Marcus to Jerome's firm. The 2 months of sitting across from my wife at dinner, knowing what I knew and planning what I planned. Those things, in whatever light there is. I don't know. I don't know. It's late now. later than I usually let it get, before I tell myself to go to bed, before I make the old man walk down the hall and close the window against the night air the way my body tells me to. Now, carefully, protectively, the way you close things against the cold, when you know you feel it more than you used to. I'm going to sit here a little longer. I want to say something, but I'm not certain what it is. I want to say that I loved her, Denise, that I loved her in the way a quiet man loves, which is deeply and without much expression of it, which is a particular failure I have to own as much as anything else. That when I found that phone and read those messages, the thing underneath the stillness, the thing underneath the plan, was grief so large I couldn't look at it directly, couldn't afford to, couldn't take the plan apart without everything coming with it. That the plan was maybe how I held myself together. That might be true. That might be the thing I've been working toward for 11 years. That the coldness was a structure, a form I built over the grief so that it couldn't flatten me. Because if I had let the grief in, if I had sat in that chair the night I found the phone and actually felt what there was to feel, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know if I would have made it to morning. Not in any drastic sense, just in the sense of being able to stand up and be a person again, continue being a person. So I made a plan instead. And the plan held me upright, and the plan cost other people, and I have been paying that off in the currency of 2 a.m. ever since. I'm not sure I'm finished paying. I'm not sure there is an amount that settles it. I sat with my grandson last summer, and we talked about soil, and he listened with his whole face, and I was, for that half hour, just a man with a boy at a table. No past arriving through the window, no weight redistributing on my shoulders. Just present. Those moments exist. They are real. And then the day ends, and it gets late, and the house gets quiet, and I come back to this chair and this room, and everything I built over the grief and the question of whether the structure was worth the cost of the materials. I don't have an answer. I'm still sitting here. The street outside is the same, as it always is. Cars parked, the oak tree with its roots in the concrete. Another city night passing over a man in a chair who isn't finished yet with something he probably should be finished with. I'll go to